I'm sure most of you have had some experience with colored pencils at some point, but before we just dig in and start using them, let's start from the very beginning. I'd like to tell you a little about colored pencils, what they actually are, and which ones you should buy. And here's a hint, you won't need an entire set. Using a limited palette is better for your color work and your wallet. So what are they? Colored pencils look like pencils, they act a little like crayons, but they're really not either one. Colored pencils are made from the same ground pigments or colors that you would find in watercolors, oil paints, pastels, or acrylics. The colored pencil core is made from a mix of pigment, clay, and a binder. It's extruded into a long cylinder and then surrounded by a wooden casing made from cedar. Let me show you how that works. In a colored pencil factory, starting with the cedar, these grooves are routed out. The long pencil cores are put inside, and then another board is sandwiched on top. So you can see here, a lot of pencils are in the making. And when they're cut apart and polished, this is the pencil that you would have to draw with. Let's talk a little bit about when colored pencils came to be. Most people think that they started with the coloring book craze, but it's really not true. The very first colored pencils were made in 1919, and they were made for map makers, cartographers, and used by architects and engineers. Here's a set of colored pencils that belonged to my grandfather, who was a bridge engineer. I've never really resharpened them because I like to see the rough look of them, but I could pick these up and draw with them today. Colored pencils really never go bad. They started being used by artists in the 1930s, and this is the very first set of colored pencils made for artists. There are so many more colors, and you can see from the illustrations, they were really thinking about landscaping when they made these pencils. Here are my colored pencils from elementary school. You probably won't find a set for 39 cents today. These were really inexpensive colored pencils with very little pigment. When I drew a red, it came out kind of pink. A dark green would show up as a light green. They weren't great pencils, but they were an exciting change from crayons for me because they would hold a point. Colored pencils have come a long way since these. In fact, in the late 1990s, colored pencil manufacturers began to make colored pencils much more light fast and more intensely pigmented. Today, you'll find colored pencil work in galleries and museums all over the world. The very best colored pencils are still made in Europe and now in Japan. There are so many different kinds of colored pencils available now. It can really be a little overwhelming. So let's break it all down. With all the different kinds of colored pencils on the market, they all break down into 3 different types. There are wax-based pencils, oil-based pencils, and watercolor pencils. The difference is what the binder is that's in the pencil. Let me show you how these different ones go down on the page. This is a wax-based pencil. You'll see a lot of color, but a rough kind of application. Here's an oil-based pencil. This one goes on a little bit more smoothly. And this is a watercolor pencil. Now this is going to be either wax or oil with a little bit of gum arabic built in. That's the element that lets a pigment flow. This one happens to be an oil-based watercolor pencil. The colors are pretty similar, and colored pencils are meant for layering. So let me show you what happens when I add another color. In the wax-based pencil, you'll still see the blue, but now you see it with the yellow and you start to feel like you're looking at a green. The same thing will happen with the oil-based pencil. It's just a little smoother mix. And with the watercolor pencil, if I use it dry, it's just a colored pencil. Let me show you what happens if I add water. When I add water to a dry colored pencil, nothing happens. But when I add it to a watercolor pencil, I'm actually creating watercolor out of dry pencils. These are a lot of fun to use. The pencils we'll be using in this class are the wax and oil-based pencils. We won't be using the watercolor pencils, but it's nice to know they exist. Even within the realm of wax and oil-based pencils, there are still a ton of different options. So let me break that down for you a little further. All pencils can be broken down into student grade versus artist grade. The difference is really in the amount of pigment. The inexpensive part of a pencil is the binder, and student grade pencils are made with more binder and less pigment. These two are both from Faber-Castell. The Art Grip is the student grade, the Polychromos is the artist grade. Let me show you the difference of what you get out of the pencil. With a student grade pencil, you get a light application of color. Let me contrast that with the artist grade, same pressure. So you can see I get a lot more pigment out of this artist grade pencil. If you're going to be buying new pencils, you'll want to look for artist grade. I want you to have success right from the start, and these pigmented pencils will definitely get you there. There are so many brands of artist grade pencils on the market, and depending on where you live, you might have different access to different brands. There are a couple of brands I find really reliable. Let me show you which ones they are. The brands I like best are Faber-Castell Polychromos, which are oil-based, and Prismacolor, which are wax-based. Now, another thing about colored pencil brands is that there's no standard naming. Let me give you a good example of that. All of these colored pencils are named magenta. What we get out of the pencils is going to be wildly different. This is a Prismacolor magenta. You can see that it's kind of a red tone. Here's one made by Derwent, a British company, and it's completely different. This one looks violet. Here's magenta by Faber-Castell Polychromos, and it looks a little more violet yet. This is magenta by Cretacolor from Austria, really more of a pink. And finally, here's magenta by Albrecht Dürer. It's kind of a purple pink. So you can see you really can't rely on the name on the side of the pencil to tell you what color you're working with. I'll be teaching you a naming system that will let you describe the color that comes out of the pencil. Artist grade colored pencils come in a range of prices as well. You're probably going to pay $2 or so per pencil, but it's well worth the cost. You'll find them at every art store, all of the online sources, even on Amazon. And Prismacolor and a couple of other brands will be available at the hobby stores near you. You'll want to store colored pencils tips up in a system like this or in something as simple as a jelly jar. Honestly, this is what I use at home. You'll want to keep them at about room temperature. If you're storing your pencils in a spot where they may get a little too cold or a little too hot, let them come to a regular room temperature before you use them. Now, let's talk about what colors of colored pencils you'll really need. It can be really tempting to buy a big set of colored pencils. Just look at all these yummy colors and all the variations that you have. I've actually narrowed this down to just 16 colors that we'll need because when we use these, we can mix anything. Let me give you an idea of what we'll use. We'll need a green yellow, an orange yellow, an orange red, a violet red, this is a violet blue, and a green blue. That's our basic color wheel. In addition, we'll add one violet, one green, and one orange, our secondary colors. And then I've added a few more just to help us make every color we could need. I have a light violet, one dark brown, a dark gray, an ivory color, a white, a very dark blue, and a dark gray. Whichever brand of pencils you're working with, you'll be thinking about these as a description of a color. For instance, this is a yellow that's like a lemon. This is one that's like a school bus. I've included a list that will give you what to think about as you're choosing pencils. It's far more important to get this variety of pencils than any specific ones. When you buy them individually, you will save a fortune. Now, if your budget doesn't allow, think about picking up a simple set of these student grade pencils. You'll find most of the colors you'll need right here. I'd much rather you just get started than stress about buying all new colored pencils. Because I've limited the palette, with these 16 pencils, it won't cost you an arm and a leg. Now we know what we need to know about the pencils we'll use, but how about the paper we're going to draw on? Let's go over that next.